Look at how versatile he can be. Sonic Mania is one of my favorite games of all time. It takes many parts in the classic Sonic games of succeeding and slaps them into this visually appealing, satisfyingly controlling, audibly beautiful video game. And, of course, when a Sonic fan with not many financial necessities hyperfixates on a game, they contribute to e-waste. Sonic Mania was released in 2017 and only released on the relevant platforms at the time. However, that doesn't stop it from being one of the most accessible Sonic games ever made. The 8th generation, which is the generation that Sonic Mania was released during, is home to some of the most successful video game platforms of all time. The PS4, the Nintendo Switch, and the Steam launcher for PC are all used by hundreds of millions of people. And the Xbox One is just used by 50 million? I don't know. Which means those hundreds of millions of people are susceptible to an autism diagnosis. But recent breakthroughs in the Sonic community had me wondering, how many ways can you play Sonic Mania? Look, this sounds stupid, but hear me out. What I mean by that is, how many different devices have the ability to play Sonic Mania from Green Hill Zone to Egg Reverie? Obviously, I'm not talking about the versions of the game that are unfinished, like that Sonic Mania Windows 10 recreation that was made before the game even released, or any other version of the game that's on something like Scratch. I'm talking about the complete, accurate Sonic Mania experience. So, with that being said, let's go over the many ways that you can play Sonic Mania right now. To begin our journey, let's go chronologically. The first way to purchase Sonic Mania officially was through a pre-order, and not just any pre-order, the pre-order of plastic. Sonic Mania Collector's Edition was the first way many people experienced Sonic Mania. It came in this giant box that comes with a giant box. Wonderful. Inside the box is a boatload of cool collector's items. First thing you see opening it is the actual download code for the game. That expired in 2019. Then there's the metal collector's key that was supposed to have the download code, but doesn't for whatever reason. There was also this little message that says fun is infinite, warning us of the apocalypse that was yet to come. Next, a mock Sega Genesis cartridge that comes with a gold ring. The gold ring has some weight to it and looks really nice, especially in person. Also, yes, before you ask, the cartridge fits into an at-game Sega Genesis console. The final and biggest thing the box comes with is a statue of Sonic standing on a Sega Genesis. It's surprisingly light, but that doesn't stop it from being an absolute unit in looks and design. Every little detail is nearly spot on to the actual Sega Genesis, and it can do this. This might be better than the game itself. Overall, while the Collector's Edition may not affect the way that you play the actual game, it most certainly affects the way that you'd experience it. I could dream of other Sonic games having Collector's Editions. Like, have you seen those Sonic Frontiers briefcases that a few Sonic Tubers got? Those things look crazy! How much for that poster, Fidel? But, of course, there were other ways to experience Sonic Mania at launch. More specifically, multiple digital platforms. On August 15th, 2017, Sonic Mania was released digitally on PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and the Nintendo eShop on Switch. And then 2 weeks later on Steam because Sega hates us. Each version is practically identical. Since the game is sprite-based, there isn't much to talk about with different frame rates, models, or visuals. The only differences are that you can play portably on Switch and Steam Deck, and you get custom icons and themes for pre-ordering the PS4 version. However, this wasn't it for how many ways you could play the game, because just under a year later, after numerous requests, Sonic Mania received a re-release on the Epic Games Store. Just kidding, that was 3 years out. No, the game received a physical copy alongside the Sonic Mania Plus expansion. This wasn't your ordinary physical copy, as it came with a holographic sleeve, a reversible Sega Genesis cover, and an art book going over the process of the game's development. This is how a premium physical edition is done, and was definitely worth double dipping back then. Now though, McDonald's combos are $13 now. Eventually, about a year or two later, the game did receive a proper physical release without the Plus content, as well as being reprinted in a bundle with Team Sonic Racing. But even still, that wasn't the end of official ways to play the game. Never mind, it was the end. In late 2020, Sonic Mania was one of the launch titles for the Amazon Luna subscription service. Now, I've already discussed what Amazon Luna is when I discussed every version of Team Sonic Racing, but to put it short, Amazon Luna is a game streaming service like Google Stadia, but their lineup is actually kind of alright. One of those games is, of course, Sonic Mania and its Plus expansion. Again, not much is different here. It's essentially the PC port of the game, just with a bit of latency now, and I can play it on my iPhone. The Luna version of Sonic Mania is perfectly fine, but you aren't missing much if you have it on every other platform the game is on. But what if you had it on something else, through unofficial means? Burn it. On the 5th anniversary of Sonic Mania's original release, a decompilation of the game was released online. For all the people out there with lives, when a game is decompiled, it essentially means that the game has been reverse engineered to allow for more opportunities with modifications with the near identical source code. For reference, Super Mario 64 received a decompilation a few years ago and was ported to practically any device you could think of. That thing you're hearing me ramble on? Yeah, you could probably play Mario 64 on it. What do you mean I have schizophrenia? Of course, when Sonic Mania got this treatment, people got to work to port it to as many devices as possible. Just a rule of thumb though, if you try any of these ports, you will need the files from the Steam version of Sonic Mania, which requires you to purchase the game. So if you don't want to spend $20 on one of the best 2D platformers ever made, I'm sorry. Now, I'm not going to go over every single port of Sonic Mania because literally I'd be here for hours. But let's go over the ones that I actually have, plus a few others. First up are the Android and iOS versions. These don't just come as a vanilla package, but they also come with mods to play the game in ultra wide and with native touch controls. If you're using an Android phone, you don't need to tinker that much with your device. It'll most likely be able to play the game out of the box. For iOS users though, that's a bit trickier. You can easily play this version if you jailbreak your phone, but I don't want Tim Cook to watch me while I sleep, so how about we don't? If your device uses iOS 17 or later, you should be able to sideload the port perfectly fine, but I'm not sure exactly how that would work at the moment. There's also the 3DS version. A little fun fact for you, Mania actually could have gotten released on the 3DS officially. One of the developers for the Mutant Mudds 3DS port approached Sega on getting Mania ported. However, Sega never responded. That or they did and they just silenced them. Getting this version to run on a 3DS is surprisingly easy, but it's gonna require a lot more knowledge than the phone versions. You specifically need a new Nintendo 3DS device, not a previous model. If your 3DS has a weird gray nipple on the right, you should be good. The system needs to be on custom firmware and you need to install the game from your SD card through a few apps on the homebrew channel. And even with that, while the game does run fairly alright, special stages notwithstanding, the game takes a very long time to load, sometimes taking up to 40 seconds. It's still complete though, so be my guest if you have the means to do it. Next is the PlayStation Vita version. I don't own a PS Vita, nor do I ever plan on purchasing one for the rest of my life, but for the unfortunate souls who do, Sonic Mania is playable on it. I'm pretty sure you do need to go through a hefty modding process to get it working, but what do I know? I don't own a PS Vita. I'm better than you. Next up is the PlayStation 3. I don't know how this works, but that's so freaking funny. On to the Nintendo Wii, and this is definitely one of the easier ways to get the game running on a different platform. Since every person who owns a Wii has modded it at some point, if you haven't, lying is wrong and you shouldn't do it. Putting Sonic Mania on here should be pretty simple. Just open the game through the homebrew channel after inserting it into your SD card and you're done. However, just like the 3DS version, the loading times aren't the greatest and the special stages are a mess. And, how could I forget, the only way to play Sonic Mania. I love it already. The Wii U version of Sonic Mania is a dream come true for me. Not because I always wanted it on the Wii U, no, not at all, but I always thought the prospect of Mania being on something as obscure as the Wii U was freaking hysterical. And now, it's here. The game runs nearly flawlessly on the console and works with all controller types. Gamepad, Wiimote, Pro Controller, as long as you aren't a sweaty Melee player who only uses the GameCube controller, you're golden. However, the special stages do have a bit of slowdown. It isn't nearly as bad as the 3DS or Wii, but it's still definitely there. Getting Mania to run on Wii U is going to be a little bit tricky though. You're going to have to get custom firmware to get it set up, and you'll need a few extra homebrew apps to get it properly installed into the system. And even so, every time you want to play the game, you'll need to activate the firmware through whatever means necessary, and boot the game up then, since Nintendo has this really weird DRM that locks the game otherwise. And that's just about it. There are a few more, like, how did this happen? But those are the big ones. All this goes to show that Sonic Mania is most likely one of, if not the most accessible Sonic game out there, and it certainly deserves it. Being one of the best Sonic games, probably one of the best games ever made, period, it's incredible to see how many people are able to experience it in its full glory. If you somehow haven't already, please play this game. I'm more than confident that you have at least something that can play it to a certain extent. So, to answer the question, how many ways can you play Sonic Mania? Well, I don't know. There are nearly countless ways to play the game, and even if I did count them, more would probably come soon after. However, I will say, the Leafs or owners in the crowd need this game. Sonic community, get to work.